are dragging in, let me go ahead and answer the first couple of quicker questions up front. That's like 5 or 6 of them. Then we can talk about this and go.
Where does he keep these?
I don't know what that first question is. Option 1, I guess, is the correct answer. All right. We got a lot of answers in there. You should go ahead and fill those out as we go. If you haven't already put in information, we'll talk about some of those. Okay, today we're going to talk about authentication, which means you being who you're supposed to be, and authorization, you have the rights to do the things that you should do. And we're going to build that on top of our previous system. So let's talk a little bit about the previous system. So let's switch over here and look at this. So this is the total time spent. Wow, this is a very broad range from 4 hours, which I don't actually believe you accomplish a lot in 4 hours, but it's okay, all the way up to 30 hours, which I imagine there's a lot of frustration in that. So a number of you have figured it out that faculty or people, I know at least 3 or 4 of you came and talked to me and said, hey, this is not working or something, is there anything you could do? And I said, sure, there's something I can do. If you are spending a dozen hours in frustration, not doing anything, give up and come talk to me and see what can be done, okay? So the idea is not to force you to waste your time. The idea is that you are making productive use of your time. Now, that being said, this is a senior level elective, and you are expected to be able to self-learn and self-diagnose problems. But it goes on to some of the other things here. Cool and important points. Let's look at some of these. ASP.NET is confusing. That's a great point. At some point, you'll probably work in a web software stack, many of you. And you'll be dropped into an Angular stack or Node stack or Java stack. And you're going to have to learn all the things about that. And it's going to be confusing. And the only way to learn is to ask questions of people around you and to read documentation online. So there's both skills that you should be doing here. We'll talk about that in a second. I really don't like the CF thing. So if by that you mean if it was confusing and it didn't work straightforward, sure. But you got to really appreciate somehow you have to get information out of the database into your objects. And once you know EF or active record in Ruby or whatever the thing is, once you know it, then the transition from the database to the code is very straightforward. And so I can understand not liking it when you understand it, but do appreciate the power. Do the tutorial and don't rush through it. Oh, God. Such good advice. Take a bow if you gave that advice. I get it. You know, most of you view school as I have to finish this course. It's a race to get to a finish line. And the tutorial is the path that you have to get through. And if you can, like, oh, there's a line of code, copy that in. Oh, there's a line of code, copy that. If you can do that and get through it and it works, you have won the race, right? You've spent less time. But if you miss a point, if you miss an understanding piece, then the time just balloons. So it's really good that you have to take your time looking through things. Private keys are annoying. Controller database seeding. Database seeding thing I find is really amazing. It's not that hard. As soon as you start with a project, you have a database, and if you screw around with the database and you mess it up, you just go to the database away, you rerun your project, and the database seeding comes back. So there are a lot of neat, powerful concepts, but how many of you don't know what Ultimate Frisbee is? Everyone? So how many of you have played Ultimate Frisbee? All right, a lot of people played. So Ultimate Frisbee, you have to throw a Frisbee from you to a friend. I coached a bunch of 7th, 8th graders in Ultimate Frisbee. The thing about it is, if you cannot throw the Frisbee, it doesn't matter how well you understand tactics, the game just doesn't work, right? So the same thing here. No matter how much you understand the basic overview of .NET or web software, if you don't get some of those details, the whole thing seems to be falling apart. If I get a chance, I'll look through some more of those and maybe talk some. I love self-discovery. If you really dislike self-discovery reading, you got to find a way to make that fun for you because you're going to be doing that a lot. Okay. Here, though, is the one I wanted to get to, which was the peers consultant.
Negative one.
I hope you don't mean your friend is a negative one. Okay, so 22% of you didn't talk to anyone in the class, or 26% according to you. And that's probably because we beat this idea into you that we're going to fail you for cheating if you steal from your friends. Either that or you're not going to be friends. So I'm going to go with we scared you with felon. I really want to encourage you to work with your friends. Look at what they're doing. Look at their front ends. Look at their UX. Ask them, hey, how'd you do that? And they might tell you something. It is perfectly fine to collaborate with our friends. It's just when you need to demonstrate that you are learning from them, you can't just take their code, throw it in your code. You have to go take their idea and then put it in your code. And then if it's not working, you can go back and ask them, hey, I tried that, but I was having some problems. What do you suggest? And get their feedback. So I do want you to collaborate with your peers because they're going to make a great source of information for you. Okay. All right, let's go back to today's topic. Oh, by the way, so yeah, PS3, if you want to touch anything up today or turn it in today or anything we say today makes you go, oh, I should have done it this way, you are welcome to touch it up and turn it in today without any penalty. So, yeah, I get it, you know. I don't want you, I was working, by the way, I spent 8 hours on Sunday fighting through ASP users, so I get it. That's why I should have probably spent some time reading some emails so I could have sent this out, so I apologize for that. But, you know, unfortunately, I didn't have a print, so I just got deep inside, and my blinders were on. I was just thinking ASP all Sunday. Okay, anyway, yeah, I get it. Some of you went down rabbit holes, spent extra time, things are going wrong, so if you have time to fix it today, you're more than welcome to do it today. All right. So a couple of things. As we move forward, you might add new items to your database. It is perfectly fine to update your models, to have new columns, and then rescaffold your projects. And my suggestion there is that you just rescaffold it with a new name, and then compare the scaffolding between the new version and the old version and use the parts that you want. The scaffolding is a magical toolkit. It does do neat things for us, but in the end, it's just generating code, and if the code it gives you is not the right code, you can change that. For example, and I'll show you this in my version, I was trying to put a time modified stamp on my record. So whenever you modified a course, it would put a time modified. And when I scaffolded it, it put that into the edit field. Like, how can the user edit the time modified? It's like very annoying to me. And so I spent an hour trying to figure out what is the attribute to tell it not to do this. And it finally didn't find a good attribute to say that I want a time modified, but I did find an attribute that I could use. So we'll take a look at that. But I do suggest that you play with this as we go forward, modifying models, doing new migrations, new scaffolding to see how things go. Oh, this is a generic one. This is nothing to do with the current assignments. Actually has to do with a lot of you who are going to be in senior capstone or currently in senior capstone. So what I really hate is when I go to a senior capstone project and they bring up a web form and say, let me show you this amazing thing, and then they spend 5 minutes filling out the web form as I'm sitting there waiting for them to type. When I come to see your web stuff, I don't want to see you type, I want to see the results. So it turns out that you can add, on the forms like the creation form, every input where they're putting stuff in, you can put a default value into the field. So let me show you how that works. Okay, so I'm going to run the solution and go to the creation of a course page. My laptop, so it's going. By the way, those of you who showed me that your laptops also cannot run Visual Studio, thank you for making me feel better on my laptop. Okay, yeah, so if you update courses, so when I want to create a new course, notice that all the fields here have values pre-populated in them, so that all I have to do is go to the bottom and hit create, and there is this new course that's been created. So when you're demoing the system, you don't have to spend a whole bunch of time typing that information. Okay, small life lesson, but an important one. Sometimes you want to put a time onto a web page. You can use universal time, but if you want to have a local time of your machine, you have to convert it to local time. So datetime UTC-now.to local time will give you the current local time on the server. And sometimes it's easier for us to see the actual time rather than have to do the mental conversion. So I thought I'd point that out. Okay, so here is those attributes. I wanted to have a time created and a time modified. And so the first time I created well, let's start with the attribute. Database generated computed. So this dot computed means that this value is going to be computed by the database system. Now be aware that none of this is required for the assignment. You didn't even need timestamps on your stuff, but if you did do them, this is the way you want to do it. You want to have the database create the time, because the time that it's really saved in the database is the most important piece of time. And so database generated dot computed is the way to go. Well, I was also then doing datetime time modified, and I had the exact same database generated computed, because the first time you modify a record is when you create it. And so I thought, well, the database should compute this. In fact, the database should just know that what I mean here is every time it goes into the database should compute it. Well, that's not what this means. This does not mean every time. It just means when it's generated. And so, obviously, it wasn't working because I had this misunderstanding. I thought that database generated had a different connotation, or maybe I didn't think that. I just wished it really hard that it would do what I wanted it to do. So I took the database computed off, and then I ran it, and it put the time modified into my scaffold. And so a bunch of Googling later, I found out that if you just say scaffold column false on top of your data field, it will not scaffold it, and so it's no longer an issue. So finding the right tags here took an hour or two of Googling, and is that a good use of time? Yeah, not really, but hey. Okay. But sometimes you can't get the things that you want from the attributes, so you have to actually write code. So where does that code go? Well, inside of your database context class, there is a function called onModelCreating. And this is where you can put extra information that you want special to your data fields or columns in your database. So in this case, we have model builder entity course. The property is time created, and it has a default value in SQL. So those of you who have taken database course, you'll notice that this is an actual database command, get date, which gets the current date. And so what this says is whenever this value is generated, you should use the get date for that from the database. And that's how you tell it explicitly the date that you want. Likewise, for the time modified, when you add it to the database, so whenever you add a course, you should, the first time you add it to the database, you would say get date, so that the first modification time is the first time it's put into the database. So just examples of how you can update your program to be a little more user-friendly. And then finally, you were not going to do this. I don't think anyone did this, so unless you did a lot of Googling, maybe you did that. But what I really wanted was the time modified to be the actual time modified. So in the database context, they have a save changes function. So whenever you're actually saving changes, you go look at all your code. Once you modify a database EF entity, if you say save changes, it sends it to the database. Well, you could override this. And so this override does this really neat thing. It says, hey, look at the entity that we're about to save. Check to see if that entity is a course, and if we are adding or modifying the course. If so, go into the course, change its time modified to be the current time, and then go ahead and save it away. So again, you were not expected to do anything like that in your code, but this is a nifty thing that allows you to look at the data before it's saved and then make changes to it at a global scale. And you could apply this to all your models if you wanted. You could put a time modified stamp on all. All right. The last thing I wanted to review was the get versus post. Remember, a controller can have an action, with the same name. So you can have a create action that shows the create page, and a create action that actually creates the object for you. In the Contasso University, you can see this with the courses edit. The first edit says get the page for editing, And the second edit is a post, which allows you to send data to change the actual object. So if you have any concerns about post and get, you should do a little reading on those on the EF entity framework tutorials. Okay, so those are just all things. Are there any questions on any of those? Feel free to interrupt. Yes.
So in part of the EF tutorials, they explain like this precedence thing with linking between entities and like tables. And they say that on-model creating has a higher precedence than any of the annotations we make in actual model class.
Yeah.
What do you recommend we do to, I guess, like build relationships? Should we do both, or is that redundant and possibly bad?
So I think it's great to start by putting the attributions here because they're easily visible inside of the actual class that you're looking at. They're very local to the definitions. So I would start here. But much of the time, those attributes are generic. They're not going to give you the explicit stuff you need. So you do have to be aware that you have to go look at the on-model creating. There's no getting around this for extra special functionality. So you have to do both. And so I guess that's one of the problems, one of the reasons I spent extra time, maybe some of you spent extra time, is I wanted the attribute to do everything for me. And I kept looking for a better attribute or a way to use the attribute in a different way. And eventually it comes down to, no, you can't. You have to use a little bit of code to do what you want the attribute to do. All right. Okay. Users. All right. So every website needs users. Every website needs some sort of authentication and authorization. And so we need to put that into our website. Now, the first question for you is, what data do you really need to know to have users and roles? Like, what's the minimum set of data? So take like 3 minutes, talk to people around you. Like when you log into a website, what information do you give it? What have you noticed on any website that gives you permissions? What are things that we need to store in our database? So take just a few minutes to think about that. What is a user? What So hopefully you've been talking about what needs to be a user as a role. What are some of the things that you need to know about a user?
Login, password, user.
One at a time, yes, please. Yes. You need an email address. Is that true? You really need an email. Why do you say email address? What? You could use it as username. Absolutely you could. Now, I think email is actually, you don't need it, but that's because I'm old. Like, in this modern world, like, if I lose my password, what do? I get back from email. If they want to send me some advice, they send me email. If I buy something from Amazon, they send me email, right? So to say that you don't need an email address is sort of to really negate yourself. So I think actually an email address is really important. Anything else that you need?
Like user permissions.
You need some permissions, so you need to know what role you are. Permissions. Anything else you need for users? Is that it? All you need is an email and what your permissions are?
Well, you'll need, if you register user, when you sign up, it definitely asks you for your name, for your last name. It needs to address you somehow.
You probably want the name, right? Yep. I think name is real important here. There must be other things that you have to type in when you're creating an account. Yeah.
Password?
A password, yeah, absolutely. Like, without a password, we're all the same. I mean, so we're talking about authentication. How do you show that you are really you? And in the real world, the answer is almost because you happen to know a couple of strange characters that are run together called a password. That's how we know you are you. And if someone else knows that password, for all intents and purposes, they are you as well. Anything else?
Maybe anything like recovery-wise, like if they forgot their password and username, some way to recover their account.
Right, so that I think the email here is probably the way to recover it. Is there anything besides email?
Sometimes they do like text.
Oh, like a phone number.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you certainly could also have a phone number so that they could text you. Absolutely. How about roles? Like, what do you need to know? Like, for our site, what kind of roles are we going to have on our site?
Admin and
An administration, yeah. Department chair, instructor, professor, yeah. So those are probably it. So roles basically need a name. Do they need anything else?
they have to have a relation to the permissions given. So either it's going to be a separate table or it's going to be stored in one table, sort of like Boolean flags.
So right, we can declare there is a role instructor, but somehow we have to define what the instructor's access is. What does that actually mean? Is that go in the database? Does that go in the code? Well, it depends. In our case, in ASP's case, that is going to go in the code. So we can put those in the code itself. All right, well, we're going to take this and shelve it for a second and move on and talk about ASP, and then we'll see if we're on the right track. Okay, so there's some required readings, authentication setup. ASP has something called the identity framework. And what is amazing is, again, in the old days, just like identity framework, everyone had to write their own password management system. So you had to have your own user tables, you had to put your own passwords together, and this led to numerous mistakes, the biggest being that people left passwords in plain text. So everyone's passwords would be in a big file with it in plain text. If someone stole the computer or accessed the computer, they would have that file with everyone's passwords. Now this wouldn't be a real problem if the password was unique to that site, but how many of you actually use the same password on more than one site? Yeah. So in fact, there's some spam went out to the U the other year or two, and I was going to send an email to all my students saying, hey, to check if your password's been compromised, go to my website and type your password in. And see how many of the students would actually do that. I think it was going to be quite high. And then once I had all the student passwords, chances are the passwords would work on other sites like Amazon and buy myself some nice stuff. Okay. So because password and user tracking was so problematic and so error prone, ASP, C#, Microsoft put together this identity framework to handle all of these things for you. It doesn't do everything perfectly, but it does a lot. It's going to make our lives a lot easier. Okay. So let's do it. Let's add passwords, let's add users, let's add roles to our program. When you create a new project, you can say that you want authentication from the get-go, but we didn't because we started small. So we're just going to add the identity to our system. So bringing up ASP.core, you will go to your project and you will say add new scaffolded item because that's where it comes from. And it'll give you this list of things. The one we are interested in is identities. So we're going to add the identity scaffolding and click add, and it's going to start building things up. And it's going to ask us for a few things. The first thing is, where is your layout.cshtml? If you don't tell it that you already have a layout, it's going to try to copy its stuff over your layout. So you need to tell it that you have a layout so that it doesn't destroy your layout. Then it's going to ask if you want to overwrite any of these files. We can ignore all of that and come down here to the data. Why is that so dark? Database context. What is the database that we want to store all of our information in? So here we're going to click add. And it says, hey, what is the name of your database? And I'm going to actually call it users roles DB because I don't like the word context, so I'm just going to get rid of context. And just say users and roles database. So add that. Okay, that's it. So I told it where my layout was, I told it the name of my database table, and I click add, and it does a bunch of magic, and ends up with giving me this README file that says, hey, here are a whole bunch of things that you should probably be concerned with. So let's see some of those things. So the first thing is I want to go to my layout. So let's go ahead and run this while we're waiting. Solution Explorer, go to the layout. All right, well, let's look at how I have my program set up. So you'll notice at the very top, it has the nav bar, and on the nav bar is Professor Saint-Germain instructor listed on the nav bar. And like most of you, that is just hard-coded already in the project. So what I want to do is go to my layout, Solution Explorer, layout, and I'm going to go find where I put that. So here's the nav bar code, and here's where the link that says Professor Saint-Germain. And because that's hard-coded, I'm just going to delete it, and I'm going to add the following, which is partial name equals underscore login partial. So, who doesn't know what a partial is? Yeah, many of you know what a partial is. In one of the learned lessons, someone said you can make small pieces of HTML and reuse them. That's exactly what a partial is. A partial is a small piece of HTML that can be used inside a bigger page. So the login, where it says, do you want to log in or you already logged in, that is a small piece of HTML that is put right here inside of this. So let's run. That was the only thing that changed. Let's run our program and see what happens. And what do we see up here where Professor Saint-Germain was? Register and login. So that's pretty cool. And if I click on register, oh look, create a new account. If I create a login, here's where it lets me log in. All that stuff for getting the user to log in is now been given us for free. If I do try to register, and I come in here and put some, like the Saint-Germain account here, suggest a strong password, and register, of course it's going to have a problem because I haven't set up a database yet. Right? But we'll come back to this in a little bit. Okay, so let's go look at this partial. Let's see what a partial actually looks like. Login partial. So here's the login partial right here under my shared code. And it's got some really neat things going on. Again, it's using the Razor syntax. And the main thing it says, if the sign-in manager says that this user is signed in, do the following. Otherwise, if the user is not signed in, do this stuff. So this is pretty straightforward, right? Assuming that whoever named these functions named them correctly. This means that you're signed in, and so what we do, we put a logout form, and we also put the user's ID. Otherwise, we put register and login up on the web page. Somewhere, though, it says hello. So the default message is to say hello to whoever you are. And I don't like hello. I think it's not formal enough, so we'll say welcome. Just to see that if we've actually changed this code. Okay, so the other things that sort of need to note is that there is this user variable that is inside of every object call. So whenever you go to one of your controllers or one of your views, the user variable represents the logged in user. It has information about that user. And we'll use that data in a while. For example, right now, we're going to use the username. We might want to put the email. We might put some other stuff. Okay. All right. So now we've got the beginning of authentication. We have to actually tell our entire web system that we're going to use it. And so that becomes very straightforward. We go to the start program. And right before we say use MVC, we're going to say app.use authentication. That's it. Now our program will be authenticated. Let's go ahead and get our database set up. So I'm going to go to my JSON. You'll notice that by magic, there's my old connection to my database. The scaffolding built this new data connection. And they look very similar, except one is going to a database called Learning Outcomes, and the other is one by the default name, which is Learning Outcome Track with the name of the project. I'm going to rename both my databases to be the same. This doesn't matter. You can have two databases, one with your users and one with your other information. But when I'm debugging, I want to have all my tables in the same spot. So this just allows them both to be in the same spot. Okay, so as always, once we have set up our information, we have to go from code to database. So we're going to go to the package manager console, and we're going to do add migration, create identity schema. So identity schema, of course, is the table for the identity framework. And we'll hit enter, and it's going to think a little bit, and it's going to give me a warning and say, hey, you have more than one database. All right, well, turns out that's fine. You think you could figure out and do both databases, but you have to tell it. So context is users roles database. So I'm just going to tell it which database I'm concerned with and type that in. And now it's going to build my database for me, and then update database, again, context, users, roles, DB. What's that?
Additional database.
Thank you. And yes.
So for identity, did you intentionally put users and roles in a separate database, or is that just like?
So the question was, did I intentionally have the names different from the beginning?
No, it's like, well, you generated a second database, right? Why not put all the users and roles in the database we already have?
So the question is, why not put all the user roles in the database that we already have? And the answer is that's what I did. But when I ran the scaffolding, the identity stuff, it just chose the database name on its own. which was different from the database that I was currently using. So the default is to choose a different one. When I went into the JSON settings and changed the name to be the same, then when I did this actual add migration, it put everything in the same database. So again, the default scaffolding puts in a separate name, but you can change it so that they're in the same name, and that's what I did by changing the JSON.
Context as a tables in that.
The context, so let's go and look at our so here is the database context, very similar to what you guys built for my learning outcomes. And you notice we use the database is a database context, and it has all of these tables, a courses table, a learning outcomes table, etc. This is what you all built for your previous assignment. All of this information is stored in one class called class DB. When I ran the scaffolding to build my new database, it produced another class that looks almost exactly what we had before, class user roles database, which is also a database context, and it just put all of its code here. Okay. So, does that answer your question? Sort of. All right. Think about it, and we can talk a little bit more afterwards, or get some more questions. Okay. So that was it. Following those steps, if I now run my program, oops, something went wrong.
Namespace.
Nothing. When I clicked on this file, I had inadvertently typed some characters in there. It's not a good idea with your code. Okay, so here's my program. If I did everything right, I have users, I have roles, and I can register users or register. So we will add this email, and we will create a strong password, and we will register, and I will save that password. And looky there, welcome, @gmail.com. If I log out, I go back here. If I log in, I can now put this one in here and log in again, and then log back in. So all of the code to build and handle users has been taken care of. And if I come down and look at what the admin has access to, oh, I can see everything. So just having users and saying their roles doesn't do you any good until you actually write code to protect your stuff. Well, let me show you what that code looks like. Oh, before I do that, I did want to real quickly in the Solution Explorer, notice there's now this areas folder, and inside the areas is the identity. So the scaffolding for identity, all the stuff it generated goes right here. So just like we were putting everything of our own in controllers, etc., it put all of its stuff up here in the areas. Okay, so there's another reading that you should read on, but let's go and protect those courses from the bad people out there who want to change what a course means. So we're going to go to our Solution Explorer and find Course Controller. And in the Course Controller, we are going to add the following meta tag. Well, I guess we have to stop debugging first, and then we can start adding code. Authorize. So we could do that. This states that everything in this controller, everything that this controller refers to, can only be accessed by authorized people. Well, what does authorized mean at this point? Any guesses?
Anybody who's bothered to create a user?
Anyone who's created a user, that's right. If you're logged into the system as a user, you are now authorized to use this. But that's not enough. we really don't want any person in our system to use this, so we are going to use the roles equals, and then we're going to give the name of the role, in this case, administrator. And I could, this is just a string, I could have called it admin, or I call it role is Jim, whatever we want, but we will use admin is for. Okay. And then I have to use Microsoft authorizations, save, and let's run our program. Oops, wait, why is it giving me a filter? Okay, what's the difference between what I typed here and what's on the slide?
Capital.
I hate capitalization. That's exactly what's wrong. Okay, so now I'm going to click on View Update Courses, and I get access denied. So no longer can anyone go to this page unless they happen to be in the administration role. Now, you can see that this should be very straightforward for our next assignment is certain areas will be protected by administration role, certain areas will be protected by instructor role, certain areas will be protected by chair role. Turns out that sometimes you want to give access to pages, you want anyone. They don't have to be logged in, etc. Anyone can have access to them. So let's go back to our controller. And let's find one in here. Let's go to the edit controller. And let's do allow anonymous. So notice that this tag is on a function, whereas the other tag is on the entire class. So which one wins?
The one that is on the function will override.
The closest one wins. That's right. So the one that's on the method overrides the one that's on the class. So here I try to go to the View Update Courses, and access denied. So hey, there's no real problem here. I can have that anonymous access because no one can ever get to it, right?
Oh, you need to know the URL. You get the URL, you get to it.
Oh, if I know the URL? No. What if I do know the URL? What is that URL here? Admin course. So if I come up here, type admin / course / was it edit that I did?
Mhm.
And let's choose something edit 1. Was it?
Question mark one.
What did I do? Oh, capital E, edit, courses, edit 5.
I think it was question mark.
Courses, edit /5.
Administrator.
Okay, well, I thought I had tested that. The great aha moment here was that it doesn't matter if you don't have a URL to your controller. People can type in any URL, they can access any part of your system. Even if you don't have a link to it, they can link to it directly, so you have to protect those. But this allow anonymous, if I put it on the right spot, if I type the URL correctly, it would in fact allow people access to this sub piece, even if they were not logged in. So let's go ahead and we'll leave that there for now. Okay, real quick, go back to your clickers question and tell me if you didn't do the two-factor question. Let's go ahead and do that right now. Yes.
How does that string administrator or whatever you choose admin associate to, the way I see it is user going to be added to a table and then you check that table for deletions. I've seen other tools that maybe define what that string can be and associate it with the table, but in this case, how do you do that?
That's a great question. I just wish we had access to the tables where those things were. Oh, look, so remember at the beginning, we were talking about what information do you need in order to keep track of users and roles. Well, here are all of the ASP identity tables, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them, of which we are going to use 3. The 3 that we're interested in are the users table, the net roles table. That's what's going to answer your question. How do you put roles in there? And then the user roles table, which is the mapping between the two. So let's look at these in a little detail first. So let's look at the users table. So view data. So here is the things that they think are important. There needs to be a username. So in this case, the username is the Gmail address. There needs to be, so a lot of their tests, they don't know whether you want capital letters in your name or not, and so they have a normalized view where they capitalize everything so they can compare the capitalized versions versus each other. So you'll notice that in a number of these things. There's an email. The default setup is to give the user the same name as the email address that they're using. There is an email confirm. So what do you think this email confirm thing means?
Yeah, like when a site asks you to confirm your email by clicking a button in some email or something like that, that would be the login system done.
Right, so when I registered, what we would have liked to happen is as soon as I registered, an email should have been sent to my email account or to that email account, and then it should have redirected me back here to confirm that that is my email. That's exactly what this is, and you can see that my email confirmed is false. We could go in and change the preferences such that if you don't confirm the email, you are not able to access the site. But by default, that's not turned on. Okay, password. So here's the password. So I think my password was something like ABC Chicken or something. This doesn't look like ABC Chicken to me. In fact, it just looks like a bunch of garbage. How can that be ABC Chicken? Yeah, it's hashed. There is a strong encryption that's taking our password and doing a one-way encryption into this random string or pseudo-random string of characters. In any database, any modern database, that's exactly, any modern web system, that's exactly what had better take place. Is they take your password and they do a one-way hash into something that looks like this. What do I mean? How many of you have never heard the term one-way hash? Everyone's, so someone tell me what one-way hash means. Someone in the back who's not answered a question today. So pretend either say I don't know or yes. What's a one-way hash?
Well, I just have a question.
Oh.
Is it like the same thing they use for like SSL encryptions, where they take a prime number and like use a map on the 2 characters to like set it?
There is a mathematical algorithm that does involve usually prime numbers, but what is the one-way part? Does anybody know what the one-way is?
So it's basically doing a formula on it so that you couldn't put it backwards through some other formula and get the same password.
That's right. So it gives me, I can take my ABC cat and get this string of numbers every time. It's easy to go from ABC cat to that junk. And it's always going to give me that junk, exactly that junk. But there's no way that you, if I give you that junk and say, this is your assignment for the rest of the class, if you reverse engineer that string back to my password, I will pass you, you don't have to do any other work. That would be a good bet I could take because I do not believe that you have access to all of Google's processing power for the next century to reverse that. Okay, so every password in a system should be saved as the hashed version, and there should be no way, and you should write this down because I'll probably ask you in the test, should be no way to go from that set of characters back to the original password. So if you are ever on a website that sends you an email saying, we will give you your password back, just let us know some information, you should know that that's impossible. You cannot get your password back. That's why we reset passwords rather than change passwords. Let's see, is there anything else interesting here? There's some security certificates which we will security stamp, concurrency stamp. These are to make sure that the concurrency stamp, I believe, is to make sure that the change has taken place recently. There's a phone number, so in fact there is a phone number, and there is a two-factor enabled. We'll talk about that in a second. And then there's this neat locked out thing. You can lock people out of their accounts. So if you're an admin who has access to the database, you can go in there and put a true into the locked out, and then they can't use their account anymore. Okay, two-factor enabled. So what did people say about two-factor? So 12% of no, 43% I put up with it, and 25% like it. So two-factor is this. There are two ways to prove who you are. One way is that you know your password, but that's not enough because if I hold a weapon to your head and say, give me your password, most of you should give me the password, right? So the second is some other way. What are other ways of doing authentication? Any ideas? Cell phone is an easy one, right? So when I go into the computing grading system, I have to have it send me a note, and I click, and so it assumes that if I know the password and I have the cell phone, I am probably Jim. Now it turns out if someone comes into my office with a weapon and points it at my head and says, give me your cell phone and your password, I would probably give them both. So maybe that's not a great two-factor, I don't know. Other two factors, you see all the time is you type in your code and then you look into something and scans your retina, so that would be a neat way. Of course, then someone in the movie is always, So two-factoring is usually enabled. We're not going to enable it for our testing purposes at this point, but eventually we'll look at it. Likewise, on passwords, so I kept clicking, give me a strong password. Normally for these demos, I just type like ABC. And if you do that, there are some rules that are built into identity that says you must have a capital letter. I say, okay, so I type capital ABC. And it says, you must have a lowercase letter. So then I do capital A, lowercase b and c. And then it says, you must have a number. And then I start to get discouraged, and so I put a 1 at the end. And then I have capital A, lower b, c, 1. And it says, now you have to have an exclamation mark or something. And by the time I have all that junk in there, I've forgotten my password. So that's why I just use this thing. Okay, so it's, by the way, you should probably put up with two-factor because if you have something important like your bank account, it's probably worth the extra pain. It gives you a little bit more security. Okay, so we looked at the users. Let's look at some of the other tables. So the roles, ASP roles, view data. Here's all that role is, an ID. If you generate a role with code, it will give you a strange ID, but IDs don't really matter, so I'm just going to put 1. Administrator. Administrator. That's it. So you want to know how you make a role? You type in the string into the database. And there's also code that allows you to put the string in the database. But that's it. Now I have an administrator role inside the database. So now there's only one last thing to do, which is, well, how do I associate this with a user? So if I go to my net user roles table and view the data, I will see that it only has 2 columns. One is the user's ID and one is the role ID. I already knew the role ID was 1 because I just typed that in. If I go to the users and go find my one and only user, let me grab this ID, copy the ID, go to the table here, and paste the ID in. I've just assigned Saint-Germain plus 2 to the administrator role. Yes?
Why are you refreshing, like, on that other table to get that table?
I want it because when you change how wide it is, it doesn't move it over.
Oh, gotcha. I was worried that it like changes.
No, it does not change. It should never change, right? Once you give an ID to a user, it stays forever.
So
So why did they choose to represent it this way with like a table in between the two instead of adding a column? Is there like an
So the question is, why don't we go into the users table and just add a column here called role, and then we could add the role directly to the user table. Yeah.
Because you can't put multiple roles.
If you wanted two roles, this becomes problematic. Or if you have no role assigned whatsoever, then you have a null or a blank in your database, which is also problematic. So that's why they did the two tables, or the three tables. Okay, so then we go back and so I'm here. I now go to my view update, which is protected by the administration role, and access denied. At which point I spent an hour, not this weekend, but in the past, I spent hours and hours fighting my code, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. So what could I have done wrong? You've done lots of things wrong in your career, so what have you done? What could have gone wrong? What are the easiest things to go wrong? I just typed a string in. Capitalization is wrong. Misspelled it. Those are two easy things. I went back and checked, is the spelling right? The square bracket authorized, did I type it right there? That's true. Did I put it in the right spot? There are lots of things that could go wrong. And after hours and hours of convincing myself I'd done it all right, I finally read the documentation. And the documentation says the following. When you log into the system, all of your roles are looked up and assigned to your object in memory. So when you log into the system, I was already logged into the system. So any change that I made is not reflected until I log out of the system and then log back into the system. Log out of the system. Let's try restarting everything. It's still, by the way, it's still possible that I did make a typo as I typed administrator here and there. So, but it is very important that you do know that you have to log out of the system when your role has been changed. So log in. All right, let's see. There's the ID, OA6 AD, and here's the ID. Let's go see if this is right. OA6 AD, that looks good. Role ID is 1. Let's go here and look at the role ID is 1.
Is it the confirm thing?
The role name here.
What's that? Administrator, administrator. Those look good.
About the name of your controller, about their role.
Let's go look at our controller. Roles equals administrator. That looks good.
Is it because of the
Not
tab?
the name of the organization.
Let's copy that. Go back to the permission controller. Save that. Log out again. Oh, by the way, this is sort of neat. Let's say I go to this page that is not protected, that is protected, and click on it. It takes me to the login site. So that, and once you log in, assuming that I did it correctly, it will take you to the correct site.
Do you have your email?
What's that?
Do you have your email and your password and everything?
I do, right. Okay. So this is a problem with my, don't get old people, but I realized what went wrong, and so I added a slide to fix it. I just did not advance my slides. But this is a good lesson because it shows you, simple things not following the instructions get you in trouble. Let's go back and say, by the way, we need to tell the services inside our program that we're actually using these roles. So we have to go to our start. And inside of our start, where we say add default context right here. So we're going to use that service. Oh, sorry, wrong spot. Not in the startup, but in the actual database context, which, as I showed you before, is under areas, identity, hosting, startup. So this is what's happening for our identity system. We have our services that are special to the identity, which is, in this case, add default identity and add entity framework stores. We are going to add roles, identity, role, like that. So what this says is, when we're doing this identity stuff, let's use the role part inside our system. Now, if I rerun, check if there's no extra slide, good. Okay, so now access denied. This is correct. Why is this correct? Because I didn't log out. Log in. And yay! Okay, where did we put the anonymous?
It was an edit.
So this was under the edit. So let's go and click edit. Oh, there it is. You see, I typed the, let's copy that URL. Let's log out. And let's go to that. Well, first see that access is denied here. And then let's go directly to that URL and boom. So if for some reason we are a malicious, disgruntled employee, and we wanted to just go into our code base and add a tiny little change that would give us access to a system that no one would know about or ever find unless they do, this would be a way that we could open up a hole in the security for our system without really making it apparent to anyone. Okay, so yes. Now the question is, what if I do change the course and try to save it? What does it do when you try to save an edit? It goes to the other edit control. And I did not allow anonymous on the other edit controller. So now it's saying, okay, you could make that change, but in order for us to accept it, you're going to have to log in. So the anonymous did not help us. I was a well disgruntled employee. Okay, so I'm hoping, so I believe I have all the notes in the slides that actually walk you through the important parts. There are 2 readings that talk about all the important parts. So all this combined should make your pathway to doing the user role starts easier than the last assignment. That is my hope. Now, someone else wrote on lessons learned was start early. Those of you who actually try this out by Wednesday could then bring questions to me about where it's not working on Wednesday, which would be a really good thing to do. Okay, a few other things, this topics, we talked about 2-factor, we talked about roles are loaded in login, we talked about passwords and not saving them. Okay, so let's make a change. Let's actually use this stuff. I want to, so you saw on my web page when I was logged in before, log in. I used to have welcome Professor Saint-Germain instructor. So I want to add the role to this welcome. So how do you do that? Well, it turns out that it's not very difficult at all. We are going to go into the login partial. Let's close all these. So go to the login partial, and we're going to add some nice code. The first thing to notice is that both the sign-in manager and the user manager have been loaded into this view for us so that we can have access to all their power. So we are going to create some code, and the thing we're going to do is say var claim equals user.claims.where. Oh, so as you're reading those required readings, you're going to hear this term claim. A claim is just a fancy word for what the system believes about you to be true, or claims it is true about you. So all of your roles are claims made by the system, and they happen to be in the database, and so they're probably likely to be true, but that's what claims are referring to. So here I want to find a claim which happens to have a value equal to admin history 4. So if you have a role, and again, roles are claims, where the role's value is administrator, then something should be going on. So let's have a role message, and we're going to have blank. So what is this role message? Let me go down here where it says welcome. I'm simply going to add the role message right here. Now, it being blank, what does that mean is going to happen most of the time? Nothing. You're going to have an empty space on your web page. But if the claim is greater than 0, so what is that? Why am I saying is claim greater than 0? What does the where return?
Array of results.
Where is returning an array of results. So if one of these things is, if you have at least one claim where you're the administrator, which is probably the only claim you have, but one is greater than 0, then we're going to set the role message to admin. So that's all the code I'm going to add here into this login partial. So every time you go to a web page, it's going to check to see if you're an administrator. If you are, it's going to make that message admin. Now let's see if that actually works.
This is the parenthesis.
Where? Far right.
We're close.
Line 6. Line numbering. Okay. So there is Sage Wing 2, and Sage Wing 2 is in fact an admin. I'm going to log in and register Sage Wing 1. And now notice Sage Wing 1 is not admin and is not being flagged as an admin. So a very simple way to keep track of the roles. It turns out, I'm not going to go into this because this is one of those exercises left to the reader. You can use that exact same trick for setting menus so that the admin gets a menu of one type, and the instructor gets a menu of another type, and the chair gets a menu of a third type, for example. Okay? I want to talk about the assignments, so I'll talk about this on Wednesday. Assignment 4. So assignments have been posted, read it over, bring questions on Wednesday, but here's the gist. It's not super complex. You're to add 3 roles. We already added 1 role to my system today. You'll add 3 roles, the instructor, the chair, the admin. Each of these roles will have access to the appropriate pieces of your assignment. There should also be a new controller that shows all the users and all the roles and puts check marks next to what users have what roles. So we'll talk about that on Wednesday, how to do that. Another thing that you need to do is on your main page, you should, just like on my main page, you should have a bunch of links to walled off sections of your document. So I'll expect that you'll have a whole bunch of admin, instructors, and chair views. And the only reason these shouldn't be here, these should be in menus and they should be walled off. Why are we putting these here? So that when we're grading and testing your stuff, if I want to see if an admin can have access to the department chair view, I just click right here. If I log in as an instructor and I want to see if the instructor has access to an admin view, I can click here. A couple other things. You are going to have, I want you to create 3 or 4 instructors and 5 or 6 classes assigned to them. And an instructor should not have access to any fields, any courses that are not the instructor's courses. Okay, makes sense? Other than that, read the assignment, Those are the main aspects, and you have until next Wednesday. Another reading assignment. So Roman Simutta has a blog on how to seed roles. So we can just go into the database just like this, and I can, once I log in, I can type in new users. But just like we seeded courses and learning outcomes, you can seed users, roles, etc. into your database, which makes things nice when you start doing stuff. Questions before we go? Yes. You can make your home page look something like this.
Is it possible that you could create assignments faster, like assignment 2, so we can get feedback a little bit earlier?
So assignment 2, I believe, is graded. We'll talk to TAs tomorrow and let it go. Yes, and they'll be starting grading assignment 3. So it's, some people are finishing it today, so we'll be catching up. Right.
So when is this?
This assignment is due next Wednesday. All right, have a great week, everyone.